Hello and welcome to the World Deciphered, brought to you by the Cipher Brief. I'm your host, Iya Meor-Mishvili. We're coming to you this week from Ukraine, where we spoke with the governor of Odesa about how his region is coping with the impact of Russia's war in Ukraine and how he's preparing for another winter at war. Also, the Cipher Brief CEO and publisher Suzanne Kelly talks with the Cipher Brief experts and former CIA officers Ralph Goff and Glenn Korn in Lviv as they share their insights about their recent visit to Kharkiv. But first, let's check in with the Cipher Brief managing editor Tom Nagorski for a look at other stories that were driving national and global security this week. Tom?
Thanks, Iya. We're actually going to begin this week with something that did not happen, or at least has not happened yet. We're talking about the high hopes in Ukraine, particularly as Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, arrived there earlier this week, that there would finally be a change, something that Ukraine has been begging for, not more money or a new weapon, but a green light to use the long-range weapons that the West has provided Ukraine against targets far deeper in Russia. And in the end, Ukraine did get more money from the U.S. this week, but no change in the rules. As we said, not yet. There are some tantalizing signs. President Biden saying we are working this out. And the United States may, according to some reports at the end of the week, be poised to change the rules or agree to a change, but not when it comes to American weapons. Now, the reluctance here is all about fears of Russian escalation. We've heard these fears before. And at the end of the week, President Putin in Russia is playing on those fears, saying that if the restrictions are lifted, that would basically mean a NATO war with Russia. Meanwhile, all week long, Ukraine has been getting pummeled on many fronts, and we've heard voices beyond Ukraine saying that for that reason alone, change must come and a green light must be given. We heard from the former chair of the Foreign Relations Committee in Latvia, who told us, quote, "You cannot fight a war with your hands tied behind your back. This is about leveling the playing field." We go next to the Middle East, where this week, for all the terror and carnage we've seen there and the huge casualty tolls, it's the death of one woman and the circumstances around it that is causing a new rift in relations between the U.S. and Israel. So last week, Israel killed and admitted to killing a Turkish-American woman, 26 years old. Its investigation found that she had been shot in what they said was a, quote, violent riot, in the middle of a violent riot. Now, a Washington Post investigation finds that the woman was actually killed after the protests had quieted down. The paper said it had interviewed 13 different people, watched 50 different videos, and now Secretary of State Blinken has called on Israeli security forces to change the way they operate in the West Bank, and President Biden has gone much further, calling the killing, quote, totally unacceptable, unquote. We're not sure where this goes next. It's hard to know, but an already fraught U.S.-Israel relationship has taken another pretty big hit. A couple of final notes. We generally steer clear of politics here, but we couldn't help but note during this week's presidential debate that when Donald Trump chose a leader on the world stage as a kind of character reference, he chose Viktor Orban, the Hungarian president. Orban is, among other things, the NATO leader least friendly to NATO, least friendly to the West, most friendly to Vladimir Putin. Here's what Trump said, quote, "Look, Viktor Orban said it. He said the most respected, the most feared person is Donald Trump. We had no problems when Trump was president." We'll leave that one there. And finally, a solemn note. No question that the most rewarding read on the Cipher Brief this week came on the 23rd anniversary of the September 11th, 2001 attacks, reflections from our community of experts, from the military and intelligence communities. We just asked them for a note or two about what that day meant to them. And given their work, they of course have powerful stories to tell. It was, as one of them said, a day of horror cloaked in glory. Others chose to remember what came later, for the nation and for the world, lessons learned, and as some said, lessons that were not learned. As I said, it's a very moving and really a great read, which you can find at our site. Back to you, Iya.
Thanks, Tom, and a quick reminder that you can get access to the Cipher Brief's open source report, a daily digest of what's happening in the world, at thecipherbrief.com. And now, the World Deciphered spoke exclusively this week with Oleh Kiper, governor of the Odesa region. Odesa, located on the Ukraine's Black Sea coast, is a critical hub for the maritime shipments of Ukrainian goods and a regular target of the Russian attacks. With its vital ports, including the port of Odesa and Chornomorsk, the region is key to Ukraine's economy, especially during the ongoing war. I spoke with Governor Kiper in front of his office in the city of Odesa shortly after one of the many air raid sirens that punctuated the day. This is what he told us. Governor, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today. It's wonderful to be in Ukraine, in the beautiful city of Odesa, and it's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you very much for coming to Ukraine and covering these events. It is very important because people hear about the war from afar and don't fully understand what is really happening here. What the Russian world is, how they actually treat civilians, our children, and how much of our civilian infrastructure has been destroyed, including in the Odesa region. That's why we are grateful that you come and cover these events.
Odesa is one of the biggest targets of Russia's missiles and drones. What is the situation like in the region today, and how is the war impacting the daily lives of the people of Odesa?
I think that at the beginning of the war, when people weren't as used to all these events, there was a very sensitive reaction. Today, we can say clearly that we don't see any significant exodus from the region after shellings. People aren't leaving the country, fleeing to Moldova, Romania, or traveling inland to central or western Ukraine. Today, people have probably gotten used to it, and they understand that if you take the right actions, like going to shelters or finding other safe places, you can stay alive. And I see that people are staying in the city. There are constantly people here, which wasn't the case at the start of the war. Back then, after any shelling, people tried to leave, but they eventually returned. So we are thankful that people have stayed in the city. I want to add that today the population of the region has even increased compared to the beginning of the war, thanks to people from other regions such as Mykolaiv, Kherson, Donbass, and Crimea who have come here.
What has been the impact of the war on the region's economy, particularly given that the population of Odesa region has grown beyond pre-war levels?
There was a serious economic downturn at the beginning of the war in 2022, during the first 3 to 5 months when neither people nor businesses understood what was happening. Starting from the summer of 2022, the trend began to improve, and I want to say that those who were supposed to resume operations did so, and we've restored about 80% of private businesses. The number of enterprises has slightly increased, and those that had stopped at the beginning of the war are now working again. Today, we are creating a number of conditions to support them, such as loans and assistance, and we are trying to attract investors to develop these areas. Therefore, the economy, although not yet back to its pre-war level, is constantly monitored to ensure recovery.
What can you tell us about the ports? How many ports are operating in the region today?
Before the war, there were 4 ports on the sea and several ports on the Danube in the southern parts of the region. It's clear that today the ports of Odesa region are the only water-based hubs left in Ukraine. With the loss of Crimea, Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Donetsk regions, where there were ports on the Dnipro and the Black Sea, these territories are temporarily occupied, and of course, Ukraine cannot use these ports today. The Odesa region, the Odesa ports, remain the only logistical hub providing for the entire country.
And what is the situation with the functioning ports?
Of course, port infrastructure is a constant target for the enemy. The ports are under constant shelling, which creates significant challenges for the port administration and businesses trying to fulfill contracts on time. Sometimes parts of the terminals or sections are damaged, and today the ports don't operate at the same speed as before. These infrastructure facilities are operating on the edge with constant transportation issues, but we try to keep working under these conditions. We understand that no one will provide us with better conditions, so we adapt to what we have.
What are the challenges for the road infrastructure in the region? There are so many trucks on the road constantly. That must create some sort of challenge for you.
There are also road problems, as most of the taxes today go toward military needs, and during the war, it's neither advisable nor allowed to spend money on road construction or repairs. However, as I'm not only a military head but also a civilian one, I have to respond to people's social needs, and I constantly do that. We evaluate which roads are critical to restore so that cars and other machinery can pass, ensuring that the economy can function. By investing some resources in fixing logistical connections, we can gain economic dividends. This is why we address requests from communities and businesses, focusing on critical roads that need to be repaired to support business development.
What are your economic priorities now during the war, and what would those priorities be after the war is over?
I think the economic priorities will come later. The priority right now is the military, to ensure we can expel the enemy from our country. We didn't invite anyone here. We are a self-sufficient state capable of managing our country. Helping the army to end the war and achieve a victorious peace is the priority. Regarding the economic aspect, of course, it's about people's social needs, hospitals and agriculture, and so on. Ukraine, including the Odesa region, is a breadbasket, a country that grows a lot in its fields. So naturally, we are focusing on the development of agriculture, irrigation, cultural projects, and sports to make the region attractive to investors. It's difficult to convince investors to come because they are concerned about the war and risks, but I understand that after the war, many will want to invest in Ukraine and develop businesses. After the war, this issue will become very interesting, and it will require a good managerial approach to direct investments properly and relaunch the region in a new and promising way.
Speaking of investors, is there a field in which you would want to see Western investors in the Odesa region?
Let me share something in confidence. We are already in negotiations with 2 U.S. states regarding the signing of a memorandum on regional cooperation. Thanks to our ambassador in the U.S., Oksana Marakova, we are conducting negotiations to sign memorandums and explore how these regions can help support us during this difficult time. Our American friends have been helping a lot, providing generators, supporting our energy system, which is in a very difficult state due to constant attacks, and assisting in areas such as healthcare and other social projects. But we want to secure specific support from a particular state, share experiences, and connect businesses so that they can see potential opportunities here, not just in Ukraine, but also in America. You know that Ukrainians are good at business, and we want to give them that opportunity.
Russia is targeting Ukraine's energy grid. With the upcoming winter, from what we hear, the situation in the country is very difficult. How are you dealing with the electricity shortages, and what can you do to prepare for the winter better?
Today, the Odesa region is among the 5 most affected regions. We don't have our own energy generation here, meaning we don't produce energy locally. It comes from other regions. And of course, when some substations or generation stations are damaged, we face the same problems as the rest of Ukraine, including Odesa. Last winter, we ensured that hospitals were 100% supplied with generators, along with schools, kindergartens, higher education institutions, and other essential structures needed for the daily life of Odesa residents and people in the region. We are creating resilience hubs in case of a total blackout where people can come to eat, drink tea, charge their gadgets, and so on. Of course, we can't foresee everything because it's a large region and some aspects might be missed, but we will fix things as they arise. Our top priority today is increasing energy generation with generators as well as building solar panels on schools and hospitals.
Odesa is bordering Moldova's Transnistria, where Russian military has strong positions. Do you feel any military threats coming from that direction?
Both we and the military are constantly monitoring the situation in Transnistria. We can confidently say that there is no military threat from the Transnistria today regarding Moldova. Our relations are strong at levels. Moldova has taken in, if I'm not mistaken, 700,000 Ukrainians who left the country and is acting as a transit hub. Many people use Moldova and its air gateway in Chisinau for transit, including Ukrainian citizens and many foreigners. As for Romania, they are also helping a lot, especially in the southern parts of our region, Ismail, Bolrad, where they have always had relationships and constant communication, sharing experiences and providing financial assistance. We don't see any major crisis or problems there.
The Black Sea security has become a critical topic of conversation in Europe as well as in the United States. From your vantage point, what role does Odessa play in the Black Sea security?
Of course, the Black Sea, while it serves as a natural barrier for the enemy, was also very attractive at the beginning of the war for Russian landing operations, particularly in the Odessa region. You know about the once famous Russian ship Moskva. At the start of the war, it was anchored here in the bay. They wanted to land forces from it in the first days of the war, but they couldn't approach the shore because of a storm. They also tried to move south of the Odessa region toward Vokov to land troops there, but they didn't succeed there either. Today, we see that the Black Sea, with our proximity to Crimea, poses a danger for us. A Russian ballistic missile from Crimea can reach Odessa in about a minute. But of course, the sea also serves as an obstacle for the Russians, as we can fully see and monitor the sea from here. If any problems or movements arise from the Black Sea, our military naturally responds. As for our role, we will do everything to expel the enemy, and we will continue to develop.
What would you like for the West to know about your region? What message would you have for the people who don't know Odessa?
You know, many people who come here ask me this question, and I always respond the same way. I say, that is not my issue. I'm not involved in international politics. But I always have one message. I say, give us weapons, and there will be no need to restore anything. Nothing will need to be rebuilt. Because when our air defense systems are loaded with missiles, nothing reaches us. And by not reaching us, this saves many lives, people, children. It saves infrastructure, any civilian, port, or military infrastructure. It protects us. So I always say this. Today, the enemy is using Iranian missiles from other states, for example, from North Korea. And we are still discussing these issues, whether we need long-range weapons or not, whether we need one kind of missile or another. While they calculate everything in the mathematical or geopolitical terms, people are dying here. That's it, in my opinion.
You probably already know that the Cipher Brief works with deeply experienced experts on global and national security to help put context around today's headlines. You can find the list of the experts we work with at thecipherbrief.com. This week, the Cipher Brief CEO and publisher Suzanne Kelly caught up with two of them, former senior CIA officers Ralph Goff and Glenn Korn, in Lviv for a ground truth check about the mood throughout Ukraine right now, from Kharkiv, where fighting still continues, to Lviv, where others are just trying to remember what it's like to live.
The Cipher Brief is in Warsaw, but Cipher Brief experts Ralph Goff and Glenn Korn are in Lviv, where they've just completed a several-day tour of the area. Gentlemen, where did you go and what did you see?
Hi, Suzanne. This is Ralph. Great to see you. Thanks for having us on. And it's very, I think, appropriate that we're making this broadcast on the 11th of September as Americans mark another sad anniversary of 9/11. And we're in a place here which at the moment seems happy, but good to remember that the Russians bombed this city just last week and killed an entire family. We've had air raids all week. As far as our trip here, I'll let Glenn talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, hi Suzanne, hi Brad, hi Cipher Brief team, and all the viewers and listeners. I want to repeat what Ralph said and stress that we drove today from Kiev to Lviv through Bucha and stopped, which is another site of horrendous terrorism. Disgusting to see what the Russians there did. I think over 400 civilians killed for no reason. We have been in Kiev. We went down to Kharkiv, where we had a great visit, and we stopped in Chornomorsk. Now we're in Lviv, and we'll be doing some other stuff tomorrow, which I won't go into detail. But it's been a great visit so far. It's extremely interesting, and our Ukrainian hosts have been outstanding.
I really want to
And
talk,
we're
gentlemen,
traveling.
about the mood on the ground there. A lot of things have happened just in the past few days. The U.S. has said that yes, Iran has delivered ballistic missiles to Russia. All the talk, of course, has been about whether the U.S. is going to give the okay for longer range missiles to be used to target sites that are deeper inside of Russia. What's the mood on the ground as all of this is going on?
So overall, compared to when we were last year with you in the Cipher Brief in April, Suzanne, the mood is darker, right? More depression, more anger, but at the same time, people try to live their lives. There's a lot of living for the moment here. For instance, the last 10 days here, we've had nothing but sunny 80-degree days, and the people have been out enjoying themselves while there's a war being fought. And at the same time, air raid alerts. When we were here last time, I think we had a couple in April. Now they're all through the night. We had one. The first night there was all night long. Air raids during the day, air raids during the night, missile strikes. People now, the mood here, it's complicated. On the one hand, people are trying to live their lives and they're trying to think ahead, but they don't really think past today. They can't plan for the future. And if you're a kid between the ages of 18 and 25, right? The draft age is now 25. 18 to 25, you're looking at what's your future? Are you going to be sent to the front? Is the government going to lower the draft age? Again into the 20s, into the teens, right? So apprehension about the long-term future is, I think, really at the top of the list in terms of mood. Glenn?
Yeah. Thanks, Ralph. Yeah, I'm stunned and amazed still by the positivity that we see among the Ukrainians in their faces, in their conduct. It's almost surreal sometimes to think that you're in a country that is being bombed, that is being attacked daily, nightly by the Russians and their Iranian allies. What I would say is we're hearing, yes, the political situation is getting tenser. I think there's more frustration in what's going on in Kiev. The people here are concerned about what's going to happen in the next U.S. elections. So we've had some discussions about that. And we continue to hear a lot of appreciation for U.S. support, but also a lot of frustration with the handcuffing or the limitations that we've put on the Ukrainians and what they can do with the weapon systems that we've provided them. So no real complaints, but the frustration is coming through. So hopefully that will be addressed.
Gentlemen, when you're dealing with missiles and air raid alerts, it's hard to say this, but words also matter very much. And as you know, the presidential debate happened within the last few days, and President Trump 2 times had the opportunity to really support Ukraine and didn't do it. I'm wondering, is that also causing concern on the ground about how he's feeling about Russia and what that might mean if he's elected in November?
Yeah, we had a lot of discussions. Our interlocutors this week varied from, people on the street, college students, restaurant workers to, government officials in the security and intelligence fields, government officials at the municipal and state levels, academics, people from the world of the performing arts and from, theater. So it ran the gamut. And look, everyone's kind of on hold for our election. They say even Putin's kind of waiting that, all this gamesmanship in Kursk, with the Kursk offensive and with the steady grinding away in the east, that's all just, waiting to see what's going to happen with the presidential election. Underneath that, though, people still, it's kind of like Charlie Brown and Lucy in the football. People still have optimism and faith in America that will do the right thing. And, it took forever to get the last aid package through, but it went through. So, they're kind of looking at it as whether it's a Harris administration or a Trump administration, they're kind of counting on America to do the right thing and support Ukraine.
Yeah, I would say that I think they're being very smart. They're not getting dragged into our domestic political situation. We've heard comments in favor of both candidates. I think, as Ralph's saying, that people are going to count on the U.S. no matter what. Not really hearing a lot of concern about if this candidate is elected or if that candidate is elected. And so I'm glad to hear that, because I really think that the Ukrainians need to be careful about being used as a political football. They have enough problems to deal with, and we've been trying to reassure them that no matter what happens in November, they're going to have support in the United States and in Europe, and that we're going to stand by them towards their victory.
Yeah. And as far as the decision to, allow the use of U.S. provided weaponry longer range into Russia. I'm sure there'll be caveats there, but my personal feeling is, why announce it? Just do it. Let the Russians discover that the approval's been given when stuff starts to blow up in Russia that prevents them from striking Ukrainian civilian targets.
That's a very interesting point. Gentlemen, let me ask you both, has there been anything on this latest trip that surprised you that you didn't expect? You were just there with the Cipher Brief in April. Any new surprises?
I would say we're hearing a lot from our Ukrainian interlocutors about the situation in Belarus. There's a lot of attention there. The Ukrainians have a very bold and courageous stance towards Belarus, and they are looking for U.S. leadership and some policy from Washington on the issue of Belarus. So hopefully we'll see that. We've heard some frustration that it doesn't seem that people in Washington are really paying attention to an issue which is very critical for them. And that's been a bit of a surprise, because as they're struggling for their survival, they're also thinking long term about kind of what's going to happen in the region and how they can make the maximum effect for what's going on with the Lukashenko regime. So it's been very fascinating. We've had some great discussions on that topic.
Yeah, I would second that, Glenn. I would say that there are some gaps in American policy making, and the one gap is how to deal with Belarus. There's almost like a hands-off attitude there, right? Which I think needs to change. I mean, there isn't a legitimately elected president of Belarus who's not in Belarus, but is in exile in Lithuania. Ms. Tikhanovskaya. And meanwhile, there's another gap, and that's Iran, with shipping drones, now shipping missiles. I think the world needs to take a really tougher stance on Iran. And, I know they're busy with stuff in the Middle East there, but policymakers need to, I think, open the aperture and look towards how this impacts Ukraine.
Gentlemen, let me just ask your impression. The operation in Kursk was incredibly bold. It was kept incredibly secret. Given that you're both former CIA officers, I know you understand how difficult something like that can be. How much of an impact did that have psychologically on not only the people on the front lines in places like Kharkiv where you've been, but also the other people that you've talked to in the cities? How much of a psychological operation was that victory in Kursk?
I think I've heard mixed reactions. It's given a morale boost to some, but some are concerned that it didn't really have the effect that they were looking for to draw off the Russia offensive to the southeast. There's a lot of concern that or a question about whether they're going to be able to hold Kursk and what the long-term plan is. But overall, I think my own assessment is it was a good move. It sent a message to Moscow, and I would also stress that the 2 nights ago the mass attack on Moscow that the Ukrainians launched was, I think, a very good thing. It sends a message to the people of Russia, again, that Putin is not protecting them, he's not keeping them safe, and that under his leadership, Russia is only suffering.
Yes. Yeah, the Kursk offensive, I agree. That was a great thing. And I tell you what, if I were the Ukrainians, I wouldn't have told the Americans or NATO about it either. Because had they done that, they would have, the Western governments would have done everything in their power to prevent it. And that move actually did send a message to Putin. But you know what? The incursion into Kursk, I think, was meant equally to send a message to a future Harris administration or a future Trump administration that, hey, we know you guys think you can take lead in negotiations with Russia and work out the future for Ukraine, but we Ukrainians, we're going to take our future into our own hands, and we're going to have a say in how this thing turns out.
Cipher Brief experts and former senior CIA officers Ralph Goff and Glenn Korn joining us from Lviv. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here with us on the World Deciphered. It's great to see you.
Thanks. You.
Good seeing you.
God bless America. Slava Ukraini.
Iya, back to you.
And that's it for this week's episode of The World Deciphered. Remember, you can watch the full interviews with each of our guests on the Cipher Brief's YouTube channel. Be sure to join us again next week for more of the deep insights and expert analysis that you've come to expect from the Cipher Brief. And don't forget to visit us at thecipherbrief.com, where you can subscribe to our open source report, keeping you up to date on what's happening in the world every Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Iya Meor-Mishuli. See you back here next week.